Hi everyone. This year Maharashtra MBA CET is getting conducted over a 3-day period, 1st April, 2nd April and 3rd April. Every day 2 slots, morning slot, afternoon slot. So overall the exam will get conducted in 6 slots. So this is the analysis of the 1st April slot 1, that is first day, first slot analysis. Now first let me look at the paper pattern. So if I look at the paper pattern, there was no surprise in the terms of paper pattern. It is exactly the same what it is mentioned in their information brochure, or I'll say your typical CD paper pattern. So you can see here logical reasoning 75 questions, abstract reasoning 25 questions, quantitative aptitude 50 questions, verbal ability and RC 50 questions. So overall 200 questions, every question 1 mark, so total 200 marks also. However, in this logical reasoning section, out of these 75 questions, 11 questions were from the quantitative ability area. So 11 questions based on your maths part. Okay, now for the people who have maths as a strong area, now for them it was advantage, but for the students for whom the maths is a weak area or quant is a weak area, for them it was a disadvantage. Fine. So out of this 75, 11 questions were of your maths part, 64 questions were of logical reasoning part, but such a abnormality was not observed in any other section. Okay, now the other things were same, there is no change in that. That is total duration 150 minutes, 5 options for each question. You can switch between any section. So there were proper 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can click on any particular section. Suppose you want to start with 3rd section, you can start with 3rd section. You can attempt any question from 3rd section at any point of time. Okay, so you can start with any section, you can attempt any question from that section, and most important, no negative marking. So it's a typical CET paper pattern, except in that LR section there were 11 questions of maths, that's it. Otherwise there were no changes or no surprises in the terms of paper pattern. Now let me go area wise detailed analysis of each section. Now the first section is a logical reasoning section. Now I split this logical reasoning section here as one part as analytical puzzles, then logical reasoning, okay, normal analytical reasoning, and the third part here as there were 11 questions of maths were asked. So the first part was analytical puzzles. Now here you can see there are 24 questions based on analytical puzzles. Out of these 24 questions, 11 questions were individual questions. Means they had given a data of 2 or 3 lines or sometimes 4 lines, and based on that one question was asked. Not all 24. So 11 questions were individual questions and remaining 13 questions were set based questions. Okay, so if I will say this should not be the first choice of the student to attempt this question, because these questions were very, very time consuming. So from this, what one could have attempted is this games and tournament set was very difficult. Even there was a one set, these are total 11 questions on distribution, but there was 5 individual questions and one set. So that one set on distribution was difficult. So if people would have spent a time, they may not have got the answer in that limited time period. So the good strategy would have been attempt those linear arrangement questions, circular arrangement questions, con based reasoning questions, and some individual questions from that distributions part. So out of 24, a good attempt would have been the around 11 questions. So again, just looking at a question, you can't say that question is easy or difficult. Only after reading some amount of data, working on that data, then only you'll be in a position to decide whether is it an easy set or a difficult set. Okay, so one set of distribution, games and tournament set was difficult. Rest of the part was manageable, but still you had to be choosy about selecting the question. So based on the student feedback, they suggested that this section, in this logical reasoning section, analytical puzzles should have been attempted at the end because they were time consuming. Instead of that, one should have attempted further logical reasoning questions and then this analytical puzzles question. Fine. So saying that, let me look at what was asked in logical reasoning questions. Look at, these are your normal analytical reasoning questions. Here also your normal variety of questions which we, if you are prepared for CT well, then all these types of questions you must have done earlier. That is direction sense, blood relations, symbols and notations, coding, decoding, analogies, series, number series, later series, odd man out, clocks and calendars, Venn diagram, deductions, data sufficiency, and some miscellaneous kind of questions were there. So total 40 questions were there. Again, attempting all 40 questions was not advisable because there are certain type of questions where time consuming. So for example, one question in that odd man out, this one question on odd man out was not so easy question. So even after spending 1 minute, 2 minutes, many students were not able to find that answer. However, your typical kind of question, that is direction sense, blood relation kind of questions, they were of a easy kind. So one should have started with those kind of questions. You can observe that there were no question based on your quantitative. You can no question based on input output, no question based on decision making. In fact, deductions also there was only one question asked, but that was not your normal deductions questions. Here they had given a set of questions, a set of statements, and the options were like that. That suppose options had 3 statements. So which option, the first 2 statements gives the conclusion, gives third statement as a conclusions. From the first 2 statements, the third should be the conclusion. So these type of questions were asked earlier also in CET. So when we conducted a deductions workshop for time students, we had discussed those kind of questions in the class also. So those who know the pattern, they could have handled those questions, but again it was a time consuming part. Okay, so out of this 40 questions also, 30 questions could have been a good attempt, I will suggest. Okay, so because you try to attempt all 40 questions, some questions were time consuming part. Fine. So all variety of questions were asked, no surprises in the terms of types and questions. Okay, let me go ahead further. Now this was a real surprise in your LR section. There were 11 questions based on percentages, probability, simple equations, time and work, time and distance, allegations and mixtures. Okay, now if you look at, if I take the feedback from the student, they realize that these 11 quant questions were easier than the quant question in the quant section. So those students who have prepared well for this topic, for them this was a bonus, because these questions could have been solved faster compared to your normal analytical reasoning questions. In fact, compared to your analytical puzzles question, which were particularly time consuming in this section. Fine. But again, these questions were very typical, straightforward questions. So somebody could have, who were well prepared for this, could have scored 11 out of 11, probably in 12 minutes or 15 minutes max to max. So such easy questions these were. Fine. So overall, if I look at a good attempt from this, out of total 75 questions, you can say analytical puzzles, one can attempt 11 questions. These 11 questions, 11, 11, 22, say 20, and 40 questions of, let's say, analytical puzzles, 30 questions from this analytical reasoning. So 30 and 20, 50 questions is a good attempt, but 50 questions will take more than an hour, because some questions were time consuming in reasoning part. Okay, so someone can reduce the number of questions attempts and utilize that time in some other sections also, if they're good in the other sections part. Fine. Let me go ahead. Now abstract reasoning. Now abstract reasoning had been a topic of discussion since CET 2021, because from CET 2021 they started putting a new types of questions apart from your regular types of questions which were asked in CET earlier. So this year also that pattern continues. They had variety of questions, different types of questions asked in this paper also. You can see that 5-figure series, embedded figure, 4-figure analogy, odd man out, counting the number of triangles, counting the number of rectangles, question based on dice, cube, okay, Venn diagram based question, mirror image, grid based question, formation of a figure. These are all typical questions which are they started asking CET 2021 onwards. So someone who had practiced, so in our time material, we had covered all these types of questions in your normal handout, as well as there was one miscellaneous handout. In that we had covered all these types of questions. In fact, there were 5 to 6 questions which were directly copied from the last year paper. So we had discussed CET, this abstract reasoning question as a workshop. In that workshop, we had discussed those questions. So there was definitely a familiarity for the few types of questions, as they were directly copied from the last year paper. Fine. So overall, out of 25 questions, one could have easily attempted 20 questions in 20 minutes. In fact, for many questions, you don't need to use pen and paper. You could have directly marked the answer just observing the figure properly. Fine. So probably this was the easiest section in this entire paper, which could have solved with in lesser time also, with a good amount of accuracy also. Okay. Now next is a quantitative ability section. Now here the many students find this section difficult. In fact, we have seen last year analysis. If you see, many times they asked data interpretation questions, sometimes they did not ask data interpretation question. So if I look at in this section, there were 40 questions were asked based on your normal maths part. Okay, and if I count the 11 questions from your LR section also, total 51 questions only based on your quant part, and there were around 9 questions on your data interpretation part. Now if I look at the list of topics, these are your typical topics where the questions had been asked earlier also in CET. So if you observe, this is the arithmetic area where almost out of 17-18 questions from the arithmetic area were asked. Okay, and numbers being a favorite of CET for many years. Look at C, they have asked us considerable amount of questions on numbers part also. So if you look at, even you have prepared a limited amount of topics, still you had a scope to attempt a considerable number of questions. The only issue was there were many questions which were time consuming, where the amount of data given was more, a reading time required is more. So those kind of questions you should have skipped. There are certain, for example, few remainder based questions, remainder concept based questions were easy. So if you know what is the remainder concept, you could have easily answered those questions. Fine. So there were certain questions where the lengthy in terms of amount of data given. So those questions could have been avoided. So you could have attempted the easier one, probably one line, the questions where the data is given in one line, two line, you could have attempted those questions. Remaining questions you could have skipped that way. Okay. If I go to data interpretation part, okay. Now here, if somebody asks me, can I skip some quant part and I would have attempted all DI questions, I'll say that wouldn't have been a good strategy here, because one of the set in DI, one of the pie chart set was not so easy. Okay, there were certain amount of calculations required, or you need to spend a certain amount of time to calculate certain things, and then you will be able to answer the questions. However, one of the table question was straightforward. The numbers were easy. If you know basic addition, percentage calculation, you could have easily handled this question. So I'll say out of 10, if you attempt all 10 questions, you can do that, but that would have consumed a more amount of time. So probably I would have attempted 5 questions from DI, and out of this 40 question I could have attempted around 25 questions in quant. So overall out of 50, the good attempt could have been 30 questions. So those who are saying, yeah, I'll attempt all 50 questions, you could have done that part, but that would have consumed more time, leaving you with a lesser time to attempt the other sections part. Okay, but there are students for whom the quant is being a very strong area, or many questions are copied from many other exams also. So people had a familiarity with that. They could have attempted more number of questions also from this area. Fine.
Okay, so let us begin the analysis of verbal ability and reading comprehension section. Now in this section, we had 4 aspects to look at. First was vocabulary, which had various question types totaling 20 questions. Synonyms 4 questions, antonyms 6 questions, idioms 3 questions, fill in the blanks 2 questions, find the correct spelling 2 questions, meanings of phobias 2 questions, and meaning of a sentence 1 question. Now, if you are a good reader, the student could have attempted easily 12 to 14 questions under this section. Okay. Then you had grammar. In grammar, you had only 1 question, and that 1 question was very easy because you had to find a correct sentence of the 5 sentences given. In reading comprehension section, which had the major chunk of questions in the total 50 questions that we had 22 questions, and of those 22 questions you had 3 passages with 4 questions each, 2 passages with 3 questions each, and then you had 4 passages with 1 question each. Now we would suggest that the student should have attempted the 4 question and the 3 question passages, because the 1 question passages were lengthier, as well as only 1 question was asked, plus it had a bit of inference based questions to be tackled. So avoiding those 4 questions would have maximized your score in this particular area. Now in verbal ability questions, you had 4 questions of parajumbles which had 5 sentences, and you had to arrange them in an order. In out of context, you had 1 question which had 5 sentences. You had to find 1 sentence which was out of the context from the other 4 sentences, and then you had a sentence jumble. The sentence jumble was very easy, but parajumble and out of context, you required to scroll the interface to check the 5th sentence. So reading became a task, and it was a bit of a time consuming thing. The odd man out 4-letter question, which is ideally a part of LR, was also asked in this verbal ability section. So overall, if you look at the section, we had 50 questions, of which maximum number of questions were RC. The second was vocab, then you had verbal ability, and the last one was your grammar. A good student could have attempted 35 to 40 questions in the 40 minutes that was given, or that was supposed to be taken for this section. Okay, coming to the overall picture, in this section you could have attempted easily 135 to 140 questions. For a good candidate, or for a student who is better, could have attempted a bit more than 140 as well. To summarize it, we could come up with a cutoff score of somewhere above 145 for good colleges under the CET. Okay, so thank you.